Okay, Wars of Religion, France. This is Fellowship of Simulations game. My first try with a new company. And what can I say? It is innovative with a lot of clever mechanisms. Things of a sort that, geez, I wish I could think these kind of things up, But overall, I think it suffered from a lack of development in a couple of ways, and it may be a little bit more scripted than was really my taste in a game. Although that helps keep the line of history going. So, I guess first let's look at the components, because that's easy, and then I can try to back those claims up. Set of dice, nothing wrong with them. I don't like them, but it's not enough to play the game, really. You need fistfuls of dice for this game. It uses a buckets of dice system. I was much happier pulling the dice that I really do like, that seem appropriate for French games for me. Both a rule book and a playbook, both glossy paper. You know my take on glossy paper by now. It has its issues. The biggest of them being that you can't write on them in pencil the way you could on paper. And so the only way that you can really get anything to stick on it, and again, I haven't tested on this paper. Some glossies, you can kind of get the pencil to work on them. But the only thing that really works on them is something like a scripto. And, well, when you're fixing errata or making notes, you kind of don't want to do it in something that can never be erased, right? And the rule book, at the very least, and there's some errors in the playbook as well, is fuzzy in a lot of places, open to interpretations. I had significant numbers of rules questions as I was playing, which I think I kind of resolved all but one of them correctly, from what I can see. The one that I didn't do correctly, there was luckily an errata question online. It's pulled a lot of questions in at this point. I don't know whether or not they're going to release living rules. I would assume so, because there are PDFs of different language rules for the game. And it would be nice if they also separated that out with a specific errata page on it. But yeah, there is a significant burden in terms of the rules as they're written. You have some nice stock player aids. These give you quite a bit of information. First of all, this is where you're gonna hold your armies. An indication that gives you much of the information you need regarding army movement. Maybe not quite everything, based on size. There's a few other. There's a couple other things that size impacts, but that's about it. All your diplomacy tables are written here. They're nowhere else, so that's, this is covered in the rules already. The leaders that switch sides, they're on the cards, but this is the ones that you can take over, so that's pretty useful. How much income each army gets in terms of troops and money. Unfortunately, the League one is missing the income prior to the call to arms. I don't know how big a deal that is. I didn't find myself needing that piece of information. This wasn't where I went to look for it. Bunch of color cubes, some counters. The counters have the names written in them in an almost illegible font and could contain other valuable pieces of information. For example, which ones are dual leaders could be on there. Some of the leaders have a little asterisk on them. I can show you here. I found something that a little piece of tobacco that got in the bag. That asterisk is so small as to be almost unnoticeable. And there's a decks of cards. Each faction has 2 decks of cards of their own, which get built over time based on the turns of leaders and events. There's a random events for combat phase. These are pretty much fine. I don't think there were any great surprises on those. For the actual leader cards, these are really nice, nicely done. Again, I'm always amazed by the quality of cards that are available, even to a small publishing house now. It's just an outstanding thing to me. And these are very good cards. The only issue I have with the card decks, there's so many small decks, they're kind of a pain to shuffle. But Gloomhaven that I have sitting over there that I'm just looking at has the same kind of problem. Lots of little decks that you got to shuffle, and I don't trust myself shuffling them, so I roll dice to position things. Whatever works. But when you're shuffling 3 or 4 cards, it's kind of weird. Is there something missing on these? Not really. But these are the only thing, along with individual player aid cards that tell you the leaders that they can take, that tell you what leaders are available to be taken. It would be very useful, and there's going to be a few of these player aids that I would suggest, but one that would be very helpful is a compendium of all the leaders with their values and their factions and everything set up. That's easy to look at. Easier to look at than this. This is really actually pretty hard to read. Just the information on it. So a big chart would be kind of nice. And, that kind of player aid somebody's going to make. And then each side has its own little event deck, which come in on different turns, just like the leaders do. And they tell you what they do. Most of them are one use only. Some of them have effects on other cards and whatnot. And most of, honestly, I think all the event cards, and there are also event chits in here, which is kind of weird, right? Each player has their own deck of event cards, but then there's sort of a handful of events that aren't aligned to a player, and those are just thrown in a cup as chits. And most of them have the rules for them written down. This was the one rule I had to look up online in the errata because it wasn't in the rule book. One of the chits, at least, doesn't have rules for it, and I guessed wrong about what to do with it. But I mean, I was just randomly guessing what it might allow, and somebody posted the actual effect there. I don't think it was the designer. I think it was someone else, but that's okay. I assume they got it right, because I can't imagine why they would do it otherwise. Now, there are a few supplemental chits that you don't really need, not all of which I understood what they did, and it wasn't clarified that there's a chit that you should go and use for something for this. It's okay. You'll figure it out, unlike some of the other things in the rules, these are just helpful mnemonic devices. The map, well, let's show you the back side of the map, which, has this pretty painting on it. Unfortunately, mine had a rip somewhere. Because the way it folds, it's protecting the front side of the map, the important part. But, this doesn't affect play or anything. One thing I can say is the board feels a little flimsy. I could see with play this thing breaking into pieces eventually. This is the main map. It's quite beautiful, but it is a little difficult to operate with, a little difficult to read at times. That's the price of beauty often. But you're going to have cubes on all the little cities and whatnot. And that particular mechanism ends up making it kind of hard to see. And you got to move the cubes a lot of the times. Stuff like that. Some of the names on the map don't really match the names that the game uses. But again, this is stuff you can figure out fairly easily. This is the case with most of the rules issues that I ran into. Most of them did not really throw me for a hissy fit. A couple of them did. Which gets us to the rules themselves. And then you have both the rules and a playbook. The playbook, let me go over what it contains, because sometimes that's important to people. So that contains the scenarios, which are really just, they all have the same end point. It's just later and later start points to make shorter games. Then there's rules for a two-player game, which, I don't know, I mean, the magic of this game to me is it's a three-player game. Three-player games used to be really, really rare. Nowadays, they're getting more and more common. But, it used to be, I had just a handful of three-player games that I could suggest to people. And especially in wargame-ish type stuff. But it's nice that it has rules for two, and it even has a solo mode that runs a bot against you. I did not play or pay attention to these very much. There's a commented first game turn that I didn't find really resolved any of my rules questions particularly, but it did help bend some in one direction or another. And it helps give you an idea of how the game is played. And then a fairly long, almost half the playbook, historical background. What's lacking here is some good designer's notes. There's a fair amount. So the core system, like I said, is innovative and unique, and there's often, a couple of paragraphs about why things work the way they do is helpful in such a situation. Although, honestly, I would find it helpful also to try to, understand what the hell, even some very general game design concepts, like, your standard old operational game, starting with Stalingrad and Africa Corps, how you make your decision on what numbers mean and stuff like that. Of course, those are the kind of designers notes for something that common and that old that really should just be exterior to the game. And similarly, how you balance out, a CDG deck or something like that. These are the kind of things, though, that, again, I'm not sure is that important. Much more important for this is there are certain choices that were made that are not obvious why they were made in a certain way. And sometimes designer's notes can give you some additional insight into that and help you understand, especially if you're wanting to tinker with the game a little bit. But, yeah, may not be a must-have here. I don't feel like there was anything that really slammed me too hard that way, where I'm just like, I don't understand why this works this way. There were more, well, there was one, but I think I actually came up with a rule that belongs in the rule book that was just a missing case, where the call to arms is triggered by the death of a certain character, and it's not triggered by it's triggered by their death under two cases rather than under all cases, and it would actually mean that the game maybe would never end, would never hit call to arms, just because that character dies under circumstances that are different from those that the designer enumerates. And that could be problematic, and the only reasonable answer to it is treat the character as if they die at the beginning of the next turn if they die in the course of play, which should definitely be spelled out there. So let me talk a little bit about what is kind of clever and innovative here, other than lots and lots of decks. So each turn you're building your event and your character decks based on what comes available that turn and pulling out the ones that would die naturally on that turn. Nothing too exciting there. On the event phase, each player draws one of their personal events into their hand, and a random chit draw is made for the general event that everybody is impacted by. Again, in and of itself, nothing that strange. I've never seen that particular mechanism with the combined, hey, you have player events and external events, but I have seen something that uses a similarity. Clash of Monarchs, a CDG, has events in the card decks which are player controlled and make sense to be player controlled. And I think most of the card ones here were player controlled. I really didn't pay that much attention to it. This is a bugaboo of mine when I'm playing CDGs. But, well, maybe not all of them. So, for example, Poland Royal Election. Would this be controlled by a player? And my answer is, I don't know. I really don't know. Many of the rest of these, you could say, well, they're at least somewhat controllable by the player. They would have some input into the facet. You might say yes. There was some capability of the Huguenots to have some control over the Polish election, and yeah, there was. It was their acceptance of the French candidate that made it more acceptable to the Poles. So, yeah, I didn't notice any that just grated on me. But yeah, the big thing in Clash of Monarchs is they have an event table in addition to the player card events. And the player card events are all things the players control. The event table is stuff the players can't control. Here, you could make the same argument, but maybe it's a little bit fuzzier. There are chits that maybe the players could have controlled, but they just wanted to make them completely random. The one you draw takes effect players don't really have a capability of influencing them. Okay. So now, the next thing is you build a hand of cards that you're going to play. And these are going to be basically the action cards that you're going to use for your turn in the court phase. And what's kind of cool there is that the player who gets to choose, the player who gets to play the cards, doesn't really get to choose very many of them. They are forced into taking the highest leader of their faction. This is something that came up in the rules question. Somebody asked, and I asked this too of myself while I was videoing it, but there are letters on some of the cards for the faction leaders and their rank, and then there are military. The military leaders have a letter on them as well. These are two distinct things, and that's not explained in the rules. The letters on the military leader chits have no relationship to the faction leader letters. One is military rank, one is rank within the faction. And the rank within the faction, one of the primary things with it, it provides you with some protection from some cards. That card can't be selected or whatever to kill off. But the faction leader, the current faction leader, will always go into your playing hand. And the Royalists, if they have Catherine de' Medici, will get her added to their hand every time, which is a big deal because she's a powerful character. And then each player picks one additional card except for the opposition player. And this is a concept that runs, that's always in play through the game. So the royal character, or the royal player, one of the factions in the game, the blue faction, always has a buddy in the game. At the beginning of the game, well, for all but one turn, that buddy is the Catholic League. And they're not really playing together, but in the military side of things, they have to cooperate. And they will each get only one card pick. The opposition player, whoever is opposed to the Royals, will get 2 additional card picks at the start. And then each other player randomly draws 4 cards from your full deck, full remaining deck, picks 2 of them to give to you, and puts 2 of them back. And they might be playing cards just to weaken you, but they might also be picking cards that the leader can do stuff that will help you in the military phase. Primarily, the issue there is if they give you a diplomat, you might be producing troops that both of you can use. Which, this is a little bit weird, but it's one of the really clever parts of the game. I have to swap batteries. Okay, where are we? So anyway, everybody passes their hand to the left, gets it back, and then they pass their deck to the left, get it back, then they pass it to the right, get it back, and each time, for the 2 times they do that, they get 2 additional cards in their hand. So they're going to have a fair-sized hand of cards. Now, you're not going to necessarily get to use all those cards. I think it's, let me see, number of actions. So the 2 people, the Royalist and their ally, get 5 actions, 5 plays of a card to do a thing. And the opposition player gets 6. This may seem weird. Well, this seems reasonable in the sense that 2 people are kind of working together, but here's the thing. You're not really working together during the court phase when you're playing these cards. But the one person who's on his own has to be completely responsible for raising his own troops, whereas the other two are raising troops to work with together. So there's some sense to this. Okay. Now, in general, anything you want to do in this game, you roll 2 dice, and you're going for a 7 or more total, and you might have a couple of modifiers on it. And there are several different actions that you can make. Now, there are 2 that are involved in trying to take over cities. One is called surprise attacks, which a character is limited to certain regions in which he can make a surprise attack. And there's at least one card that has a value which is only used for surprise attacks, but he does not have it does not have a region. The Ugnal assemblies. And I think that's just a misprint, but I don't know what kind of misprint, whether it should have something listed on it for provinces, or whether that strength should just be 0 so it doesn't confuse someone like me. I treated it as the latter. Okay. Oh, it's not possible to take La Rochelle. I don't know if I did. But anyway, what you do is you roll the dice, and you pick a city you're allowed to do this on. You roll the dice. There's a -1 penalty for going for a large city. There's another option here, which is only usable if you're on the royalist, if you're aligned with the royalist. If you're either the royalist or their buddy. Cooperating factions is the word that they use here. There, you're allowed to try to take a city anywhere on the board by using a character's intrigue value. They have 2 values on them. Explained this during the game show, but so this guy's got a combat value and an intrigue value. His combat value is only usable, well, he was a bad choice. It's only usable in cities that he has listed on him. Now, he has no cities listed on him, but he's a faction leader. If he is the faction leader, he can make that attempt anywhere. Otherwise, his strength doesn't matter as far as I can tell. But anyway, he could use his intrigue against any royalist character if he's aligned with the any royalist city in case he's aligned with the city. And the roll and the effects are exactly the same. Now, there's a track running around the board to keep track of how many cities you have, and you want to keep that up to date. Because otherwise you're going to have to do a lot of counting every now and then. You may still have to, but... Okay, other actions you can make diplomacy actions, where you're rolling here and trying to get extra troops and money for the combat phase. This is where there's a missing rule, having to do with where the troops come from for the Protestant states. My understanding is they would come from the Holy Roman Empire, but it's not spelled out. That was one of the many, hey, what up? Okay. Those troops are going to be put on the board immediately, and the money is recorded on the table immediately. These are not going to be usable until the war phase. You can do a write a treaty. You're allowed to succeed at this only once per turn. Most of the leaders, most of the factions only have 1 writer. But you don't want to cause somebody to lose that writer, because then they get a lot of flexibility if they have no writers at all in their deck. Which is kind of important, because otherwise this would be one hell of a target. The reason is there are 2 things at the end of the game, if you make it to the end, that are important. for victory. One is the number of cities you control, and one is the number of treaties. I think they mean treatises. I don't know, because they also count as your victory points at the end of the war phase. But these, what they call treaties in this, you basically have the capacity to generate one per turn with your writer if you get your successful roll. And then they're going to be important towards your end victory points, although cities are more important. You can also recruit a character from another faction. Each faction has a list of leaders that they're able to recruit, and those cards will have a dual color. What's weird about this is these aren't like in La Révolution Française, where they can switch sides back and forth continuously. Once they've switched once from their original side, they're fixed on that other side, on that other faction. There's a little bit of difficulty with this because the military counters are associated with the cards, but which means that there will be multiple military counters for these dual leader cards. You have to be careful, and it doesn't warn you about this, to make sure that the leaders who have two counters aren't in both factions. One of the reasons why I think there should be some kind of symbol on the counters to indicate, hey, this switches factions, just to make sure that it's easier to find them and check them. Okay. Now, you do have your list of who's there, and that helps you determine, so you don't have to paw through the other player's deck to see if you have any. And more importantly, pawing through the other player's deck will give you information about what they have in their hand, which doesn't seem like it's fair to have. Now, there's an action that allows you to do this where I think the only answer is to paw through their deck in their hand. There's cards which allow you to basically eliminate an enemy character card. Because there's no compendium of characters, you have to look through the deck and apparently through their hand to be able to know who you're trying to kill. But anyway, you can try to recruit a character. This will be an intrigue action, so is the diplomacy. Some of these actions have a bonus. Treaty and diplomacy, there's characters who have a bonus on them. Treaty can only be done by a treaty writer, though, unless you're out of treaty writers. Then the final action is only allowable by the royal player. It's an intrigue-based action. Again, roll for a 7, you have plus your intrigue on the die roll. Only the royalists can do this, and they're trying to raise their tax base. And you really want to have one tax base each turn in order to field a decent army, etc. Additional ones don't give you very much, but you can do them multiple times. And there are cards which give you advantages for having multiple times. All right. After you play through the court phase, then there might be a flurry of event cards being played. There are event cards that can only be played in the court phase that are usually, most of them, most desirable to play at the very end of the court phase, so you don't give any information to anybody. And they seem to be playable kind of at any time during the court phase, not just on your turn or anything. So, yeah. Then we hit the war phase. Now, in the war phase, each player draws a war card, which is an event which will help you militarily and playable at your option. You can save these just like the other events. You can save them all game if you want. Some of the player events might become unplayable just because other events have canceled them out or whatever. And then you recruit any additional troops that you're due. Now, the royalist player gets his additional troops off his tax base. Each point of tax base he spends, he gets more troops from. The first one's a really big deal. Later ones don't give you very much. The League generally doesn't get troops. On the last turn of the game, they get a bunch of troops, one per city. But at all the other turns, they just get a fistful of cash. They also get cash with their troops, both do. And the Huguenots get troops and money based on their cities, but not on a one-to-one basis. The League gets a lot more of both, which is fitting because whenever the Catholic League didn't tend to control a lot, but they had a lot more support than was apparent by the territories they controlled. Same thing is true in La Révolution Française. Now, troops are kind of a weird situation because, remember, two players are aligned as the same side, the Royalist and someone else, probably the League, except for one turn each game. They each have their own set of armies counters, and you reflect the strength of the armies with cubes. As far as I can tell, they're one combined side with twice as many armies as the other side has, which gives them a great deal of flexibility. Their leaders will get placed based on their rank letter. The highest ranked leader, the A-ranked leader, if there is one, whatever. If there's more than one, the A-ranked leaders, have to be placed on the largest armies. This works very much like EU does in terms of the leader placement. Then the B-ranked leaders get placed on the next largest armies, etc. And as far as I can tell, for the coalition side, it's really up to the Royalist who to assign to which army within those constraints. Those constraints take effect at the beginning when you set up, and then at the beginning of each side's war turn, whatever, war round is what they call them. And so the leaders move around. It's not clear whether or not you are flexible to move them around completely in between war rounds or not. I played that they weren't because that weakens the Royalist a little bit. Otherwise, the Royalist can just constantly be screwing their ally over by swapping leaders around and everything. And I thought that was a little too much. The opponent player is also restricted by this letter basis, but he's only got his own set of armies, right? Of course, he's got less potential for total troops on the board. Then, on the war rounds, you have to move your highest ranked leader first on any given war round, if you're going to move him. That is not clearly stated that way, but that's what I interpreted the meaning to be. And the highest ranked leader will, if he chooses to move, you pick a location he can move to, you mark that. That's your target space. And then as many armies as you wish can move into that target space. The total strength aiming there it has to remain 9 or less, though. Well, or else you'll end up starving some people. Now, you're allowed to jump outside your ordering to bring cooperating armies into that maneuver. There's a cost based on the size of the army that moves, and bigger armies move more slowly. And then finally, they have a higher rate of attrition. Small armies, size 1 to 3, have no attrition. They can move like 3 spaces. But a large army can only move 1 space, costs you $3 to move instead of 1, and automatically takes an attrition. Except attrition happens after the end of the movements for that force, or for the round. It actually says at the end of all movements for the round, the active player must pay money points based on the troop points. That disturbs the target idea. You place a target marker, you move your forces. If you move them all, which is what it kind of implies, that causes some issues. So my assumption is that battles and sieges happen. Interesting. Okay, I played incorrectly. All right. Battles happen interrupting movement, even if you end in the target space. Sieges appear to have nothing to do with movement. And that means you don't have to pay to siege a city if you're located with it, which is not what I did. When you move through a space with an enemy army, that army can try to intercept you. Or if you move into and don't want to attack it, I guess. If you do want to attack it, that army can evade. I don't think you can attack on the march. I think you're either intercepted or you continue marching through. Again, that's just me making interpretations, but I made one interpretation that I think was clearly incorrect about sieges. I believe sieges happen with all your stacks that you wish to do them with. For actual battle, it's a buckets of dice system looking for 5s and 6s, like in Here I Stand and whatnot. And Sword of Rome, I think, has that too. Maybe not. That may have had something very different. You get one die. You get one die for each size class. So for every 3 or fraction of strength to the army, you get a die, and then you get dice equal to your leader's leadership rating, which means leaders are really, really fucking important. You can easily beat something that's much, much larger than you. So a 1-point army with a 3 leader is getting 4 dice. A 6-point army with a 0 leader is getting 2 dice. You roll all those dice, you count your hits. I would guess if you wipe out the enemy army, you win. But that is not what the definition is. The definition is actually different from that. Each hit eliminates 1 enemy troop strength points. The army that caused the most hits wins the battle. So a 1-point army could go in, attack that 6 or 9-point army, roll 4 dice, get 2 hits. The enemy gets 1 hit, wipes me out, and I have won the battle because I caused more damage. Feels a little wrong, but this is important because you get combat round points, combat points, whatever you want to call them, war points, based on what you beat, the size of the army you beat. Now, if there's a tie on the number of hits, the largest army wins the battle. You also have chances of leaders dying in battle. Alright, and then apparently, and I played this completely fucking wrong, after all movement and battles are completed, sieges are resolved. And I guess you check every city, you don't have to pay for this at all. And you'll basically be doing the same kind of die rolls for your army, and the cities get either 1 die for small, 2 dice for large, or 4 dice for Paris, if I recall correctly. Somewhere it says it, but I don't see it. Yeah, there it is. Oh, and La Rochelle. Wow. Forgot all the special rules about La Rochelle. Okay. Well, what that means is the war can go on long after people have run out of money because you can keep sieging things. Which, again, I played that wrong. You'll determine the winner, and you'll have collected up points on the little track for the war. And you get points for winning battles, you get points for capturing cities, and you get points for capturing enemy leaders, which just sort of happens at random. I mean, they have to be fighting, but it's not really something like wiping out the army doesn't give you a better chance or anything. Whoever has the most points in the war has won the war. Now, all ties are always determined by the royalist player, so they would get to choose amongst players for that. And the person who wins gets a treaty point in addition to all the cities they captured, right? Which is kind of the goal. The royalist player will always, if they win, will always get to, I'm sorry, the Huguenot player, no, let's just try this every way we can. The League player will always get a cube from the royalist player, a city of the royalist players, anytime they win the war. The Huguenot, on the final turn, will get 2 royalist cities if they win, but only on that special final turn. And then all the armies and money and leaders are removed from the board, and that's it. Okay, you have automatic victory conditions that each side has to achieve, and I found those tough, as they should be. So, for example, the League has to control twice as many cities as the Huguenot. That I never got really close to that. The Huguenot themselves have to control more cities than the 2 other players, and they have to have Paris. That is almost impossible early in the game. If the Huguenot are doing really, really well later in the game, well, they might be able to end it early that way. And the Royalist, and this is the most likely, is that they have to reduce the number of League and Huguenot cities to less than 6. I came fairly close to that. But if you don't get an automatic victory, you get a victory based on 2 factors: the cities you control and the political conviction. Now, this works kind of like, what the hell is his name? I love his stuff. I don't know. It's the area majority stuff. And I can't remember his fucking name. My brain is mush these days. Knizia. He does a lot of area majority games. This uses something similar to that kind of mechanism, but only on two planes. So whoever gets the most cities gets 7 points, second most gets 5, third most gets 3. Okay, well, I'm not quite sure why the person in the last place gets points and why you shouldn't just have it be, 4-2-0, but because there's no multipliers or anything like that come into play. Then whoever has the most treaties, and remember, you get these by winning wars and by playing writers, gets 4, second 2, third 1. And again, this should be 3-1-0, I think. There's nothing, oh, I screwed up. The Royalist No, no, no. Okay, so there's no discussion of what happens between largest number of points in this case. I don't know if the royalist gets to use his ability on each of these. So, like, in my game, I think all three players had the same treaty points. Now, the royalists won anyway, but if they could realign those because they're tied, that would give them a little bit more power than they already have. What they already have, though, is, well, something close to that. If there's a tie in total victory points, is that possible? Yes, it is. Which is just these two factors. If there's a tie in total victory points, the winner will be the royalists. The faction allied with the royalists is second place in winning ties. Well, so what's funky and new here? It's really that three-player dynamic where two players are allied and they don't really have control over that alliance, but they're able to do things to each other. During the court phase, you can do surprise attacks against anyone, and if you're allied, if you've got an ally, if you're on the royalist side of things, you can also do intrigues to try to gain stuff. The actual play of the war side of things feels too little. Although sieges happening without movement may change that a bit. I just felt like I was running around stomping on cities and very quickly ran out of money or troops in each case. But reading the rules again here, I feel like, yeah, I've misunderstood that part and made a major, major error in my play. Overall, I had a fair amount of fun playing this. I do think it's an interesting design, and the biggest problems I had with it that I pointed out, the biggest problem really has to do with some play aids that players will no doubt make eventually, and that'll be available, and the fuzziness of the rules. The other issue that I brought up was scripting. So, the game makes Henry of Navarre invulnerable to most, but maybe not all forms of death. Like, I think there are ways to kill him that maybe you're not supposed to have. The game forces his adoption as an heir. It really has to do with the channeling of that facet of the wars of religion that I feel hemmed in by that in a way that I don't really like. So, you're gonna lose the last heir, the last of the Valois heirs, and Henry of Navarre will become the heir, and the Huguenots will become allied with the Royalists. This is the one piece where I think things are just way too scripted, but I don't see a way around it. It is the design of the game. The design of the game is to express that 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 outcome. Um, Something in me says I would prefer a design that allowed more flexibility among the players to determine what the alliance is. Always with the Royalists, but did they want to be aligned more with the League or more with the Huguenot? The problem with that is when it came down to the wars, when it came down to the fighting, the Royalists and the League did always bind together until the end. So, maybe what I'm asking for is not the wars of religion as they happened historically. It just feels to me like I would prefer that it was player actions and player decisions that brought you to that point. But, the players aren't the characters on the cards. And it really is Henri III's decision to switch to Navarre, which makes this platform, And is it foreordained, Well, okay. But something always feels a little wrong to me when I'm forced into that kind of position. And this game it takes that as the framework upon which the game is hanging. So take that how you like or not. There were some holes in the scripting, though. So, for example, the one leader who triggers the call to arms on his death, in most cases, there's at least one case where his death is not spelled out as causing it. And I think it's possible to kill Henry IV. It's also possible that Henry IV becomes a royalist-aligned character very early, like when he first shows up in the game. And I think this is meant to represent his conversion. There's a conversion card which just turns him, but it's pretty easy to turn a character without, that card. You just use an intrigue action and you take that character. And he's a powerful character. So as soon as he shows up, the royalists are going to want to grab him, I think. And then I think there's some case under which he can die, which doesn't really violate the game too much if you allow that. The fact that they made him immune to death for most cases and may have left the one out. The one case, let me tell you what it is. Let's see if I can find it. No, it's not in the Royalist deck. I think. Maybe it is. And if the Royalists want to kill him, let him. I mean, they're going to get him, like I said. But let me check the Vengeance card, because I think that may be the... Okay, yeah. If assassination has been played against a Huguenot leader, against a League leader, remove a Huguenot leader. You can kill Henry of Navarre with this. There's no limitation on it. Trying to remember if assassination... Assassination, also. You can remove an enemy leader. No limitations. No. I played, perhaps mistakenly, that you couldn't remove a faction leader. But, all right. So I'll pack this up, send it upstairs where the more historical stuff is. And those is my thoughts. I guess kind of as a final thinking, I doubt this is going to get a reprint. You know, it's just probably not going to get that popular. So your choices are, if you are interested in it, either buy it kind of now, or to wait on the used market. By the time it gets on the used market, well, first of all, it'll probably be cheaper, just the nature of these things. But it'll also likely, have a errata written for it, and have some player aids out there. It is definitely interesting. Anyway, up it goes.